I discovered that the most hated emperor of Rome may have never set the city on fire, and that everything we believed we knew about him was invented by his enemies. Before starting, let me know in the comments where you are watching this video from, so I can see how far it has reached. Rome was the center of the known world. Its legions dominated territories from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to the Euphrates. The white marble of its buildings shone under the Mediterranean sun as a symbol of civilization, order, and eternal power. But that facade of glory hid a much darker truth. In the heart of the empire, within the walls of the imperial palace on the Palatine Hill, a silent and perpetual war was fought. There were no armies or open battles. Only poison in wine cups, daggers hidden among silk tunics, whispers in dark corridors, and alliances broken before dawn. In that world of calculated betrayals and murders disguised as accidents, no one was safe. Not even the emperor. Especially not the emperor. The throne of Rome was not a gift. It was a battlefield where every day meant surviving conspiracies, where every dinner could be the last, where trusting someone was equivalent to signing your own death sentence. Emperors died poisoned by their wives, stabbed by their Praetorian guards, strangled in their baths. Their children were executed as potential threats. Their mothers manipulated them like chess pieces. Their advisors plotted to overthrow them while smiling during the day. In that nest of vipers, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus was born on the 15th of December in the year 37 after Christ. The world did not yet know him as Nero. He was simply the son of Agrippina the Younger, a woman of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, and Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, a man described by historians as violent and corrupt. Lucius's family was stained with blood before he took his first breath. His father died when Lucius was barely 3 years old. Some said it was dropsy. Others whispered about poison. In Rome, the difference between illness and murder was impossible to distinguish. What was clear was that Agrippina was left alone with a small child and ambitions bigger than the empire itself. Agrippina was no ordinary woman. She was a great-granddaughter of Augustus, the first emperor. Her brother had been Caligula, the emperor history would remember as a madman who appointed his horse consul. Agrippina had survived Caligula's reign of terror, had been exiled, had seen her sisters die, had learned that in the imperial palace the only rule was to survive at any cost. And she knew exactly what that cost would be. When Claudius, Agrippina's uncle, became emperor after Caligula's assassination, she saw her opportunity. Claudius was older, considered weak by many, manipulable. Agrippina needed to get close to him. She needed to marry him. It didn't matter that he was her uncle. It didn't matter that he was married. In Rome, incest among members of the imperial family was not a scandal, but a political strategy. Agrippina seduced, manipulated, and conspired until she got Claudius to divorce his wife Messalina, who had been executed for treason. In the year 49, Claudius and Agrippina married. Little Lucius was now 12 years old and had gone from being a provincial orphan to living in the center of imperial power. But Agrippina did not stop there. Claudius had a biological son, Britannicus, who was the natural heir to the throne. Agrippina could not allow that. Her son, Lucius, had to be emperor. So she orchestrated a meticulous campaign. She convinced Claudius to formally adopt Lucius, who changed his name to Nero Claudius Caesar Drusus Germanicus. Then she arranged Nero's marriage to Octavia, Claudius's daughter, thus consolidating her position. Britannicus, the legitimate son, was marginalized, sidelined, forgotten in the shadows of the palace while the adopted son shined. Nero grew up in that toxic environment. As a child, he learned that smiles had daggers, that loving words could come from lips that the next day would order your execution. That family love was just another form of control. His mother constantly watched him, directed every aspect of his education, chose his teachers, controlled his friendships. Nero was not a person. He was a project, an investment, Agrippina's path to absolute power. Nero's tutors were carefully chosen. The most famous was Seneca, the Stoic philosopher who preached virtue, moderation, and self-control. The irony of history. The man who wrote about morality was the one who educated the supposed monster. There was also Sextus Afranius Burrus, prefect of the Praetorian Guard, a disciplined military man who taught Nero about loyalty and strategy. But no philosophical lesson could compete with the real education Nero received every day. Watching how his mother eliminated obstacles, how she manipulated the emperor, how she turned allies into enemies and enemies into corpses. In the year 54, Claudius died. Officially, it was a stomach problem after eating mushrooms. Unofficially, everyone knew that Agrippina had poisoned him. The emperor's favorite dish, mushrooms prepared by his trusted taster, who conveniently answered to Agrippina. Claudius died in agony while palace doctors, previously bribed, ensured he would not survive. Nero was 17 years old when he was proclaimed emperor. 17. A teenager with absolute power over the largest territory in the world. A young man who loved music, poetry, and art, who dreamed of being an actor and singer, who wanted to compete in the Olympic Games. But fate had given him legions, provinces, enemies, and a throne stained with blood. The first years of Nero's reign surprised everyone. Under the guidance of Seneca and Burrus, the young emperor showed moderation. He reduced taxes, organized public games, improved provincial administration, respected the Senate, or at least pretended to. Rome breathed a sigh of relief. After the madness of Caligula and the weakness of Claudius, they finally had an emperor who seemed sane and competent. People talked about Nero's quinquennium, those first 5 years of exemplary rule. The citizens loved him. He was generous, approachable, interested in the welfare of the people. He organized theatrical shows, chariot races, athletic competitions. He participated personally, something scandalous to the Roman aristocracy but adored by the masses. But cracks began to appear in the palace. Agrippina had not placed her son on the throne to see him rule independently. She expected to control the empire through him, to be the true power behind the emperor. At first it worked. Coins showed the faces of Nero and Agrippina together as co-rulers. She attended imperial council meetings, unprecedented for a woman. She demanded honors, titles, privileges. Nero, initially submissive, began to resent maternal control. He had his own advisors, Seneca and Burrus, who advised him to establish distance from Agrippina. He had his own desires, his own ideas on how to govern. For the first time in his life, he had something he had never experienced before, real power. And Agrippina was not willing to let go. The tensions exploded when Nero fell in love with Poppaea Sabina, a beautiful, intelligent, and ambitious woman. He was married to Octavia, Claudius's daughter, but the marriage had been political, cold, empty. Poppaea represented passion, freedom, personal choice. But Agrippina opposed her violently. A divorce would weaken Nero's position. Octavia was his legitimate link to the Julio-Claudian dynasty. The mother-son relationship deteriorated into open war. Agrippina threatened to support Britannicus, Claudius's biological son, who was now a young adult with rights to the throne as legitimate as Nero's. He was an existential threat. As long as Britannicus lived, Nero would never be safe. So Britannicus died. During a banquet in the year 55, Britannicus drank from his cup and collapsed convulsing. He died within minutes while the guests watched horrified. Nero remained lying down, calm, and explained that Britannicus suffered from epilepsy. Only a seizure. Nothing worrying. The body was cremated that same night under torrential rain, so quickly that there was no time for an investigation. Everyone knew the truth. Nero had ordered the poisoning of his adopted brother. Locusta, the most famous poisoner in Rome, had prepared the mixture. Agrippina had created a monster, and now that monster was learning to use its claws. But even after eliminating Britannicus, Agrippina remained a problem. She conspired, spread rumors, maintained contacts with discontent senators. She was too dangerous to leave alive, too well known to assassinate openly. Nero tried several times. First, he tried to poison her, but Agrippina, paranoid and clever, took antidotes daily. Then he designed a boat with a collapsible roof that would fall on her during a nighttime trip. The boat sank as planned, but Agrippina managed to swim to shore. Finally, Nero lost patience. In the year 59, he sent soldiers to Agrippina's villa. She immediately knew why they were there. According to accounts, she opened her tunic, pointed to her belly, and said, "Strike here, where the monster was born." The soldiers stabbed her to death. Nero had killed his own mother. the act that Roman society considered the most unforgivable crime. It didn't matter that Agrippina was manipulative, dangerous, and responsible for multiple murders. He had killed his mother, and Rome would never fully forgive him. The propaganda started immediately. Seneca wrote a letter to the Senate explaining that Agrippina had conspired to kill Nero and that he had acted in self-defense. The Senate, terrified and complacent, accepted the official version. But the people whispered. Nero's enemies took note. Every crime was archived, every excess remembered, waiting for the moment to be used against him. Nero, finally free from maternal control, plunged into his passions. He divorced Octavia, who was exiled and later executed under false charges of adultery. He married Poppaea. He dedicated more time to music, theater, and the arts. He organized competitions where he himself participated, singing, playing the lyre, reciting poetry. For the common Roman people, this was entertainment. For the senatorial aristocracy, it was an intolerable scandal. An emperor should not behave like a street actor. It was degrading, unworthy, shameful. But Nero did not care. For the first time in his life, he did what he wanted. Then came the night of July 18th in the year 64. The Great Fire of Rome. It started in the shops near the Circus Maximus. The fire spread rapidly through the densely populated districts, fueled by wind and wooden constructions. For 6 days and 7 nights, Rome burned. Of the 14 regions of the city, only 4 remained intact. 3 were completely destroyed. Thousands died. Hundreds of thousands were left homeless. Nero was in Antium, his hometown, when the fire began. He returned immediately to Rome. He opened the imperial gardens to shelter the displaced. He organized food distributions. He reduced the price of grain. He personally participated in the rescue efforts. According to multiple sources, he worked tirelessly to help his city. But the rumors had already begun. It was said that Nero played his lyre while watching Rome burn, singing about the fall of Troy, that he had started the fire intentionally to clear space and build his Domus Aurea, his golden house, an extravagant palace that would occupy a huge part of the city, that he enjoyed the spectacle as if it were personal entertainment. The reality was more complex. Nero did build the Domus Aurea after the fire, a luxury complex without precedent with artificial lakes, vineyards, colossal statues, and rooms decorated with gold and precious stones. For the hungry and homeless people, seeing the emperor build an ostentatious palace was a direct insult. But did he really start the fire? The sources are contradictory. Tacitus, the Roman historian who wrote decades later, admits there is no conclusive evidence. Suetonius, another chronicler, repeats rumors but acknowledges their speculative nature. Cassius Dio, writing more than a century later, presents the fire as intentional but without direct proof. All these historians had something in common. They wrote under later emperors who had come to power precisely by overthrowing Nero's dynasty. Their accounts were not neutral. They were retrospective propaganda designed to justify the regime change. What we know for sure is that Nero needed a scapegoat. The people were furious, looking for someone to blame. If they did not find one, they might turn against him. So Nero chose a marginal, strange, suspicious group, the Christians. Christians in the year 64 were a minority sect, viewed with distrust for practicing secret rituals, rejecting traditional gods, and preaching about the end of the world. Nero accused them of starting the fire. Hundreds were arrested, subjected to public tortures, crucified, burned alive as human torches to illuminate Nero's gardens during his nocturnal parties, thrown to beasts in the amphitheater. It was a brutal persecution that sealed Nero's reputation in Christian tradition. When Christianity became the official religion of the empire centuries later, Nero was reinterpreted not only as a bad emperor, but as an enemy of God, the Antichrist, the incarnation of absolute evil. But at that time, most Romans did not protest. Christians were strangers, convenient, disposable. However, the persecution did not stop the rumors about Nero. His popularity among the elites was in free fall. The executions of senators and aristocrats for real or imagined conspiracy multiplied. Nero saw betrayal everywhere, and he was not completely wrong. In the year 65, the Pisonian conspiracy was discovered, an elaborate plan by senators, military men, and aristocrats to kill Nero and replace him with Gaius Calpurnius Piso. The conspiracy was betrayed before execution. Nero responded with massive purges. Dozens were executed, including his former mentor Seneca, who received the order to commit suicide. The philosopher who had educated Nero in virtue and moderation died, cutting his veins in his bath, dictating last words to his scribes while bleeding slowly. Each execution fueled more resentment. Each purge created new enemies. Nero was trapped in a spiral of paranoia and violence from which he could not escape. The imperial system that his own family had helped build was now devouring him. In the year 65, Poppaea died. Nero, according to reports, kicked her during a pregnancy in a fit of rage. Other sources suggest she died from childbirth complications. The truth was lost among contradictory versions, but the result was the same. Nero had lost the woman he loved. He plunged deeper into his artistic performances. He traveled to Greece in the year 67 to participate in musical and athletic competitions. He won all the contests, obviously, because no one dared to defeat the emperor. He brought back 1,800 victory crowns. Meanwhile, in Rome and the provinces, the legions began to move. The true power of the empire did not reside in the palace, but in the armies. And the generals were fed up with Nero. In the year 68, Gaius Julius Vindex, governor of Gaul, openly rebelled. Although his revolt was crushed, it ignited the spark. Galba, governor of Hispania, declared his intention to take the throne. The Praetorian Guard, which had protected Nero for years, changed loyalty. The Senate, seeing the opportunity, declared Nero a public enemy. It was a death sentence. Nero, the man who had ruled the world, found himself completely alone. His advisors fled. His guards abandoned him. His friends disappeared. He tried to escape Rome disguised, hiding in the villa of a freedman named Fan. There, in a small, dark room, surrounded only by a few loyal slaves, Nero heard the sound of approaching horses. The soldiers were coming to arrest him. He knew what that meant: public torture, humiliation, execution in the Roman Forum. He tried to commit suicide but could not find the courage. He cried, trembled, hesitated. Finally, with the help of a secretary, he plunged a dagger into his throat on the 9th of June in the year 68. His last words, according to Suetonius, were, "What an artist dies with me." Even in his final moment, Nero saw himself as the misunderstood actor, the artist rejected by a public that did not appreciate his genius. He was 30 years old. Thus ended the last emperor of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, not in glory but in shame, not surrounded by loyal followers but abandoned by all. The man history would remember as a monster died scared, alone, and crying. But the question remains, was he really the monster they told us? The historians who wrote about Nero had clear agendas. Tacitus was a senator, a member of the class Nero had persecuted. Suetonius collected gossip and rumors without rigorous verification. Cassius Dio wrote generations later, relying on second- and third-hand sources. The Christians, understandably, hated him for the persecution. Later tradition made him the literal Antichrist, the enemy of God on earth. But archaeological evidence and modern analysis present a more nuanced picture. Nero was popular among the lower classes during most of his reign. After his death, several false Neros, imposters claiming to be the surviving emperor, appeared, supported by crowds that really believed or wanted to believe he had returned. His economic policies benefited many. His love for Greek art and culture, though scandalous to conservative Romans, represented significant cultural openness. His personal participation in public shows, far from degrading, humanized him to the common people. Yes, he ordered executions. Yes, he killed relatives. Yes, he ruled with growing paranoia in his later years. But was he different from other Roman emperors? Augustus, the revered founder of the empire, had proscribed and killed thousands during the civil wars. Tiberius, his predecessor, had retired to Capri while executing enemies from afar. Caligula had been genuinely insane. Claudius had been manipulated by murderous wives. The Roman imperial system operated through violence. The throne was maintained by preventive executions, political purges, and calculated terror. Nero did not invent these tactics. He inherited them. He learned them as a child. And when he tried to rule differently, when he showed moderation and generosity in his early years, he still faced constant conspiracies. What was he supposed to do? Wait passively to be killed? Trust a Senate that hated all emperors by principle? Ignore the real betrayals happening around him? Nero's paranoia did not arise from nowhere. Britannicus was a legitimate threat. Agrippina conspired actively. The Pisonian conspiracy was real. The generals eventually rebelled. The dangers Nero perceived were not completely imaginary. The fire of Rome remains mysterious. There is no solid evidence that Nero started it. In fact, his actions after the fire, providing shelter and food, suggest otherwise. The story of playing the lyre while Rome burned is probably a later invention, designed to illustrate his supposed madness and indifference. The construction of the Domus Aurea was excessive and politically badly timed, but many emperors built extravagant monuments. The difference was the timing and public perception. The Christian persecutions were horrible, but in Roman context, sacrificing a minority group to calm the masses was standard politics. That does not morally justify it, but it places it within normal imperial behavior patterns. What made Nero a unique monster was not necessarily his actions, but how they were recorded, interpreted, and amplified by later generations with specific motives to demonize him. The Flavian dynasty that replaced him needed to justify their coup by presenting Nero as an intolerable tyrant. Christians needed an archetypal villain for their narratives of persecution and martyrdom. Senators needed an example of why emperors had to respect traditional institutions. Nero became the perfect receptacle for all these needs. His love of art made him effeminate in traditional Roman eyes. His disdain for senatorial conventions made him dangerous to the aristocracy. His persecution of Christians made him satanic to the emerging church. The image that survived was not that of the scared teenager manipulated by his mother. It was not that of the young emperor who reduced taxes and organized disaster relief. It was not the artist who dreamed of music more than military conquests. It was the madman playing while Rome burned. The remorseless matricide. The personified Antichrist. That image served political and religious purposes for centuries. It became accepted fact, an unquestionable truth. But real history is always more complex than the myths we build around it. Nero was born into a family where murder was commonplace. He grew up watching his mother poison his stepfather to put him on the throne. He learned that power required cruelty because every authority figure in his life showed him that daily. When he finally had power of his own, he used it as he had been taught, to eliminate threats, to protect himself, to survive in a system that forgave no weakness. Was he cruel? Yes. Was he paranoid? Increasingly so. Was he responsible for innocent deaths? Absolutely. But was he the unique monster history painted? Or was he simply another inevitable product of a corrupt imperial system where absolute power corrupts absolutely? Perhaps the question is not whether Nero was a monster, but whether the empire itself was. A system that required constant murders to maintain stability. That turned children into killers. That rewarded betrayal and punished trust. That eventually devoured every emperor. Nero died at 30 years old, abandoned and terrified, plunging a dagger into his neck to avoid public humiliation. The artist who wanted to be remembered for his music was remembered as an arsonist and tyrant. History is written by the victors, and Nero's victors needed a monster. Maybe they found one. Maybe they created one. Maybe both things are true simultaneously.